The Competitive 40K Network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and this week we are joined by a very special guest and war member, Justin Moore from Texas. Justin, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me, Nick.
You're very welcome. We're excited to have you. I know we've had your friend and testing partner, Kit Smith-Hanna, on before, and it's only been a matter of time until we got you on for a tournament win and a golden ticket award. Congratulations, with Necrons of all factions.
Yeah, Necrons, they're definitely fun. I had a good time.
Awesome. Well, that's pretty much what we're here to unpack. We're going to get to know you, Justin, your play style, how you've grown as a player. I know you and I have had the chance to play each other maybe 2-3 years ago now. It's been a minute. And back then, you were not the kind of player that was taking down super major events. So to see that kind of growth and player development over time is something that's really special, and we want to try to capture that. And then, of course, we're going to talk about your army and how it all works, this Necron menace of yours, because it's Hypercrypt, but it's Hypercrypt done very, very differently to what we've seen before. And then, of course, in part 2, folks, that's going to be for our patrons. That's where we're going to have all that good stuff, the nitty-gritty details, so the game by game, play by play that Justin can walk us through to go through how he won this tournament. Justin, are you ready?
Yes.
Awesome. Tell me about how you got into Warhammer. I didn't actually know this about you.
Okay, so about 3 or 4 years ago, it was right around COVID. My company brought me out to Dallas, and it was a company I built bridges for, and they had a long project, so they brought me and my wife out to Dallas and basically just lived out of a hotel room for a while and was extremely boring. So one day I just decided wanted to go find a game to get into. So I was driving around and saw a game store, went in there and saw Warhammer. I was like, this looks cool. Saw some people playing it and went and looked at the armies and ended up buying some Death Guard and took them home, painted them up, and, just got into the hobby side first.
So that's a really interesting story, and it sounds so natural, but it's also not. It's very unique to you. Most people I asked that question to talked about how they started as a kid, they got into it when they were young, they probably fell out of it for a bunch of years and came back to it in a different part of their life, or they stuck through it the whole way through. Very few people, I feel like, discover Warhammer as an adult, or maybe that number is increasing in the new times. What is it like discovering Warhammer as an adult? I feel like that's got to be so strange, like these people play with these miniatures, they build them, they paint them, they cost a lot of money. What is this hobby? Like, how did you look at this and you were like, I want to get into that?
Well, so I've always been like a competitive person. At first, I didn't know how competitive it was. I just thought it was cool. But then I talked to some of the guys in the store and they were like, yeah, there's like a whole scene. I was like, really? So I, looked into it. Not long after that, Dallas Open came around. It was the first major they ran out of COVID, and some big names there like you, Lennon, Naden, Brad Townsend, Oliver Smith, bunch of those guys, and got to really see what it was like on the next level of play. And man, I was hooked when I just saw, how in depth the game was. I was like, this is awesome. So
at that point, how long had you been playing for already? Because when I played, I would have assumed you've been playing when you and I played, I assumed you'd been playing for a while, and you just weren't taking it that seriously, but I didn't realize you were brand new.
No, that was the first Dallas Open I went to. When me and you played, I believe was the following year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I went to back, but I went to that first one, and man, I was hooked. I was like, one day.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. So what was that journey then? You saw a taste of the competitive life and you're like, that's for me, I want some of that. From there, how do you actually progress? That's such a mountain to try to climb. How did you do it?
There's basically two parts to it. One of it was I joined the war room and started listening to the content and just kind of wrapping my head around it.
You don't have to say that. That's on you.
Yeah. No, that's the truth. I just tell it how it went. So that was one side to it. And, I participated in a lot of the clinics where I would ask Siegler questions, I would just really dive into it and ask a lot of questions and wrap my head around it. And then the second part was when Brad Townsend moved to Dallas. I got to start practicing with him, and he really helped to level up my game. That was when I think he was still with Art of War. And yeah, that was just, it leveled me up. And my competitive thinking, man, I didn't know anything before until I started, watching y'all's content and then playing with him. Just warped me into a new player.
That's kind of crazy, the timeline of that, because that's pretty much right when Art of War was starting to stand on its own feet and be a business and all that. So to have that be a contributing factor, and Brad's a great guy. Brad's been one of my friends for like decades now. So he's an amazing mentor to fall into for someone who's trying to get into competitive 40K. It's almost like it was, meant to be in a way. That's really exciting. So how did you find your journey of skill increasing? I mean, like, you watch these Warhammer videos, that's obviously part of it. You're playing with players who are better than you. But part of Warhammer's challenge is that it's really hard to identify what you did wrong and how you can improve for next time, because the game is so vast. Like, maybe you lost in deployment or list writing or turn 2, this one decision point. Maybe it was the list altogether. Like, how do you break that down and learn from your losses?
So I think so when I first started, it would have been just, I didn't understand the concept of, it's not always about just killing stuff. The game is very in-depth. The movement phase is one of the most important things. And in the beginning, I just kind of would just push my army out and try and kill something. And I learned very quickly that's not going to cut it with competitive play. As I started to progress and learn, my biggest two things was the movement phase and deployment. And as I slowly got better at that, it took a while. It went, I started out going 3-3 majors. Pretty soon I found myself going 4-2. I think my first 5-1 was after I had been watching y'all's content for a while. Me and Brad had been practicing for an event, and then I believe it was Clutch a couple years ago, Clutch City. I went 5-1, and I was so stoked over that.
Wow, that's really impressive. Just that trajectory right there.
Yeah, no, it was so. Did pretty good last season. I won my first major last year, and that was the first one I had ever won, and that was 2.5, 3 years after I'd been playing. Won my first major last year, which was funny because it was Texas Open, the one that I'm on here for with you. And then this season, man, I've had a blast. I think I'm top 5 in the world on ITC and pretty high up there on ELO, and I think I've gone undefeated at 4 or 5 majors so far this season. It's been really fun.
Man, that is absolutely fantastic. Like, I didn't realize you were so high up there in the competitive ranks, Justin. You've really been crushing it. I saw you play this year earlier in I think it was quarterfinals or something, top cut of the US Open in Dallas. And you were playing a really exciting Grey Knight army, really powerful back in the day. We called these Dread Knights and Land Raiders. But now you've kind of made a big departure. You've been playing Admech, I've seen in the past. You got this Grey Knight army. Now you're playing Necrons. What's like your play style that you've found within this game?
So one thing that I've noticed that I do really well with is armies that have movement jank, whether it's the uppy downies or the ability to, go up at the end of the opponent's turn, stuff like that. Grey Knights, I really love them because of their uppy downy ability, the Mist of Deimos. Like cool movement tricks is what I'm finding, because I also played GSE. That's what I won Texas Open with last year. So a lot of those type of armies really just suits my play style, being able to reposition my army and really take the full potential of it. And
dude, I love that. You and I play the game exact same way. I love that.
Yeah. Well, the whooping you gave me a couple years ago, I learned quite a bit from that. How you beat me, I've used that on quite a few times.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm so glad to hear. What is your explanation of that game? I'm curious.
So basically what I learned from that game was I deployed heavily between 2 buildings and behind a ruin, and got move blocked into Oblivion, where I just didn't get to leave my deployment zone. And then you basically said, we're going to do this all over again next turn. And we did. We
can keep this up all game.
Yeah, it was basically what happened. And I was like, oh, my God. So I basically just learned mastering move blocking levels up an army.
Dude, it really does. And, we say that movement wins games, but to have you come on, have a game lost because you didn't understand movement as well as your opponent, then learn that lesson and apply it to your own games to now become this 40K monster. Justin, like you can't write it better than that. Like, thank you. You're welcome. I don't know what to say here. That's awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so exciting. Okay, so that brings us kind of a little bit over to your list that you took to the Texas Open. And man, does it have movement jank? Why don't you just read it off top to bottom, and then we can explain how this whole thing works.
Okay, so I was running Hypercrypt Necrons. I had the Chronomancer with Dimensional Overseer, which is basically just get the fourth pickup, and the Chronomancer gives Fire and Fade to his unit, so he goes with Warriors. I have the Plasmancer with Arisen Tyrant. He gives critical hits on 5s, and the Arisen Tyrant gives full rerolls whenever they come in from reserves, or reroll 1s if they didn't. So that stacks really well with the Warriors, lethal on their guns, so they get lethal 5-ups with 4 rerolls. I have 2x20 Warrior bricks, which just go with the 2 characters I said. One is and the Chronomancer also gives -1 to hit, shooting and combat. So it's a real, tough to deal with unit. They fire and fade, and they're -1 to hit. So the Warriors go with those 2. Then I have 2 units of Death Marks, which are just cheap units that have Deep Strike on their data sheet. So they're just really good for mission play and move blocking. I have a Canoptic Reanimator, which just suits really well with everything, healing, the Warriors, everything else on the list. I have the Canoptic Spiders, which gives a 6-up Feel No Pain to vehicles and a 5-up to everything against Psychic and Mortals, which is really good now since the Devlin change. And I have 2 Doomsday Arcs and 2 Monoliths with Death Rays. And that's the list.
So on the offset, it looks kind of strange. 2 big 20-man warrior units with a Chronomancer and a Plasmancer each joined them. 2 Doomsday Arcs, 2 Monoliths. Rule of 2, I see. Justin, I know this army goes up and down. It's Hypercrypt. It's 3-inch away. But what is this army doing? Can you explain to me your strategy here? This looks like it does so little damage, and it's got warriors, but not much warrior support. It's not the warrior detachment. I'm just so confused.
He is the master of jank. It is so fun if you can really utilize it. So
you're speaking my language.
Yeah, we're talking the good language now. You got the Monoliths, which they shoot pretty well. Sometimes they just pop off. They're pretty durable. They're toughness 13, 2-up safe, access to a 4-up invuln for 1 CP. They have an ability that at the end of the movement phase, I can teleport an infantry unit wholly within 6 of them, which goes really well with the Fire and Fade Warriors because they don't have to. There's no limit to how close. They just can't be in engagement range of the opponent. So they can try and screen me out. I can 3-inch the Monolith to get closer, teleport the Warriors to get right outside engagement range, and then Fire and Fade to get even further. If the Monolith started on the board, they can then charge for 2 CP, the Warriors. There's that. Then they're -1 to hit, shooting and combat. If my opponent goes to shoot them, if they don't solo the brick for 2 CP, I can teleport the Warrior brick away to my second Monolith, which is usually in a good spot where I have a good hiding spot to teleport them to next to a Reanimator who's then going to heal them on my turn. So there's that. The teleport is the big play with the Monoliths. It's so hard to stop and it makes your opponent just put so much energy into trying to stop it, especially since you can't screen the teleport very well. You can screen the Monolith from dropping in 9, even 3. But a lot of times, even when they screened the Monolith, I would just drop it 9 away, wouldn't even bother 3-inching it. Teleport the Warriors, Fire and Fade, still end up on objectives that they were trying to stop, which they would measure all types of stuff out. And sometimes if I just needed to kill something, I would do the other Warrior brick with the Arisen Tyrant, which that brick is nasty. It did 14 wounds to Canis, which is, when you add up 2 Monoliths, 2 Doomsday Arcs, and then that Warrior brick, it kills anything I need to really reliably take down.
It's pretty crazy. So let me try to break this down. There's basically two abilities at play here. One is the warriors can teleport to within 6 inches of the monolith at the end of your moon phase. And the other is that the warriors can teleport to your monolith after they've been attacked. And you're kind of using this in conjunction with two monoliths to play one offensively and one defensively. And the offensive one is trying to deep strike like 3 inches away or force some screens, then even 9 inches away and just be aggressive. And then it's going to teleport this warrior unit wholly within 6 of itself. And the monolith's an enormous pyramid. So that's like a lot of board space. And then the warriors will shoot, whatever, and then they move 5 inches after they're done. So that now this is like a unit of OC20 or OC2 per model dude. So 40 OC in like weird lines and malleable shapes, basically contesting like 2 objectives or stealing 2 objectives from your opponent, pretty much as the plan. And when they go to attack these warriors, they just like phase away and go to the second monolith, which is like chilling in the back. And then you can kind of just rinse and repeat this process. Is that the idea?
Yes, that's exactly the idea. The one part too is that the monolith teleport ability works for getting the warriors out of combat as well. So if my opponent charges them and I still want to be able to shoot the warriors on my turn and I don't use the teleport away because that works in shooting and fighting. If I don't use that and because I want to take their primary or whatever, they just don't kill enough. So I'm like, don't even bother using the strat to teleport away. On my turn, I can then at the end of my movement teleport them out of engagement and then shoot them and then fire and fade them again.
Wow. Yeah. So you basically, even if you get engaged, you just leave and then you just run. You can't stop the cycle unless you actually kill all the warriors. And to actually kill all the warriors, you have to do it pretty much in one shot. Otherwise, they'll just leave and go to the backup monolith.
Exactly. If they kill enough, then I'll teleport them away. But if they go in and just whiff and kill, 8 or 9, that's just not it. I just decide to stay.
Yeah.
A lot of people underestimate it, and they'll, we'll move 10 Hell Blasters out with Oath and think that just solos it, and it's like that's not even close. So it ends up.
How durable are these warriors? Because they don't have any defensive capabilities. I guess they have -1 to hit, but other than that, that's just a toughness 4 1/1 model with 4 save.
Yeah, so it's basically just a T4 body with it's the -1 to hit and the number of bodies really. The -1 to hit makes it just the math, with a lot of things.
Right, even with rerolls, -1 to hit going to like 4s rerolling to is like 75% hits, not like 100 or anything like that. It's a big difference. We're trying to one-shot it.
Yep, and a lot of times because it's Hypercrypt, there are things that can one-shot the brick. There's not a whole lot of things out there that do, and if I know my opponent has units that can do that, a lot of times I'll just play the waiting game and screen them out and wait for them to bring that unit down if they have it in reserve, or if they don't have it in reserve, set up one of those plays we just talked about with the teleport and hit that unit with the other warrior brick, the offensive one, and try and some of its bodies or kill it so it can't hit me first.
I love how you have like the 2 different warrior bricks, one to like move around and be this total move blocking nuisance, and the other to like actually lay the hammer down, especially in conjunction with the Doomsday Arcs and the monoliths. With that said, though, you're only playing basically with 6 units. You have like some Deathmark squads to like do the mission and stuff, but your 6 units, 2 monoliths, 2 Doomsday Arcs, 2 warrior bricks can only like do so many things, interact in so many places. Like if you're trying to keep up this loopy strategy, where loopy meaning like you go up, you come back in a loop, and you're also maybe required to do actions for like a secondary or the mission or the primary, whatever. And your opponent is trying to kill you, presumably, and stop you from playing Warhammer. How do you manage all that like the economy of your army? That's really tight.
Right. So the MVPs, as far as my actions, I use my aura monkeys, which is the reanimator and the spider. I use those 2. The reanimator is really good at it because he has a built-in 4-up feel no pain against all attacks, and the 2 units of death marks. So those are my main action monkeys that go around doing stuff. The reanimator is actually tough to kill. He actually requires effort, and a lot of opponents I found that most games they don't even bother because they risk if they come out to try and kill him, they're getting blasted by 2 DDAs, 2 monoliths, and a warrior brick. So in most games, they don't even bother going after it. And he just hangs out. A lot of times I'll pick up a couple hammer units each turn because I don't have to pick up the warriors using the hyperphase. I just use the monolith to do that. So that saves those pickups. So almost every turn I can pick up, a monolith, a doomsday arc, and then 2 units of death marks, or a death mark and a reanimator, to then go do whatever actions I need them to do.
So hyperphase lets you pick up 3 units at the end of your opponent's turn and put them in reserve. And then you have a relic to allow you to pick up 4. And You're basically just really relying on a mixture of, like, just this, like, you have 4 units to do actions: a spider, a canoptic reanimator, and 2 units of death marks. And those dudes going up and down as part of those 4 really puts your units in the spots they need to be. But as your opponent gets to interact with them, and like your death marks, if they go on like a suicide run to secure extend battle lines or something, they're not gonna survive, presumably. So after the 2 of those are expended, is it really tough these days? I know you said you have the reanimator, but that's still only 1 piece.
Yeah, so I'll use it the reanimator, the spiders. The death marks, I usually, they're like gold to me. I try and keep them alive if I can. Like if I get extend, or the other one, secure no man's land, stuff like that, or the area denial, I'll try and use my fire and fade warriors to go do that for me, where they'll go shoot something, fire and fade towards the middle. The change to area denial is helpful, where you don't have to be holy anymore. You just have your unit in range of it.
Right.
Is helpful there. So for a lot of those where I don't need to actually use one of my resources and get it killed, that's what I'll do instead. The death marks, especially, I try and keep them alive, which a lot of times I'll find myself 3-inching them just to get them into a good, safe spot. That's going to require a lot of effort for my opponent to go actually dig them out, which it's a 60-point unit. They're, 9 times out of 10, they're just going to not even go for it.
Right.
If they do, it's like, okay, that's fine. Then they just lose the unit that went after them. And it still requires some, decent shooting to kill them. They're T5 with a 3-up save and 5 bodies. So, it's power armor, basically. So I just try and keep them safe.
It makes sense. So my next question is about your CP management, because we talked about how your action economy is tough, but your CP economy is also tough. It's 2 CP to go and teleport the warriors back to a monolith after it's been attacked. And then it's 1 CP to 3-inch away. And at a bare best case scenario, if you're doing that every battle round to 3-inch away and then 2 CP to teleport away, that's your command phase, your opponent's command phase, and you ditched a tactical card. So you're not doing anything else with your command points, and you're ditching a card every turn to facilitate that. That seems really pricey, which means either you're doing that very diligently, or you're making tough choices on what strats you're using and when. So how do you manage your command points?
Yeah, so the 3-inch, I try and only use it if I need to. Very rarely do I use it offensively, like to teleport behind my opponent, to pop up behind them and try and do a play. A lot of times I'll end up having to use that for some type of mission play, but I'll only use that maybe twice in the game. The main ones that I use is the 2 CP teleport away and the 1 CP 4-up invuln on the monolith.
I forgot that also costs CP. Yeah, wow.
CP. Usually in a game, I only teleport the warriors away twice. By the usually turn 2 or 3 is when I do it first. I'm usually not super aggro turns 1. Turn 2, sometimes I am, but a lot of times I really drop the hammer on turn 3, where I've built up a lot of CP. The game shifting to where it's mainly tactical now, that helps a lot. And there's a lot of cards that are harder to score. There's so many cards where you're just like, I could get 2 points here, or I could bank the CP. And a lot of times I just will go for the CP rather than the 2 points. I'm like, I can get a mini engage here, or I can get a CP. I'll go for the CP here. Or if it's just a blowout, then I'll just get the point, go for the points.
Yeah.
Just have to play it by, opponent dependent on that one.
Absolutely. Makes a lot of sense.
If you are listening to this, it probably means you play Warhammer 40k. And if you're playing Warhammer, you know you need a lot of dice. Baron of Dice is where we get our dice from. They produce amazing different kinds of dice. We just recently got all kinds of different faction dice shipped to us, which we use on our stream games. But not only do they look really cool, but they're highly customizable. You can get different symbols, corners that are square, corners that are round, different shapes and sizes, different sided dice. It's all the rage. And they're customizable in color and design as well. They are so cool looking. Not only that, but they feel great to roll in your hands. I've never held dice that roll and feel this good. Not only that, but they are scientifically perfectly balanced. There are tons of case studies on people rolling thousands of dice and recording all the results that they get. And sometimes you might get a die that rolls just a few too many ones. We've all had to throw it out before. These dice are not like that. They are perfectly balanced to a T, thousands of rolls, perfect distribution. If you want to take your Warhammer game seriously and make sure the dice are not screwing you over, get some Baron of dice.
Talk to me about like that cadence of play you had. When I imagine you said in the beginning you'd like put the monolith right in their face and bring the warriors, and I imagined a model showing up in their deployment zone. But it sounds like you're not doing that. You're just kind of like moving up the table a little bit and then putting the warriors forward. What is like your pace to the game? How are you tempoing your army across the 5 turns? It seems like you're not aggressive with it.
So turn 1, I'm usually not aggressive. Turn 2, if my opponent moved out, then if I need to, I will go forward. I'll pick up the monoliths and go for a play with that. Almost always by turn 3, I'm just in their face because by that point, I'm trying to move block you into your deployment zone, kill as much as I can, move block you in there while keeping resources safe, behind walls, holding objectives, or just having enough stuff where you have to deal with the warriors in your face that are move blocking you and the monolith and try and just pin you. The monoliths I don't like to go behind their deployment zone because I risk getting pinned back there because I can't go back up. If they charge the monolith and wrap it, then the monolith is just trapped there. So I like to put it in a spot and then have warriors in front of it and use it more of a move block / objective stealer with the warriors. And really, I just learned that through testing where, I tried that a few times where I'll teleport a monolith, they'll leave it behind them, kill something, and then the monolith gets trapped, especially if it's a good player playing. A good player will take that every day of the week, just trapping that for the rest of the game.
What do you mean trapping that monolith? How does that work?
So basically just charging it with either a trash unit of theirs, something where they can just pin it in place. It only moves 8 inches and it's 6 inches wide. So it's very easy to just lock it in place. Charge it with whatever trash they have. I can't overwatch with it. It's Titanic. So if I put it in a compromising spot, I risk it getting wrapped is basically
because you can't hyperphase into reserve at the end of your opponent's turn if you're engaged in combat, and it's a monolith that can't fall back and do anything.
Correct.
I get you. So how do you keep the monolith and the warriors alive through the course of the game? And I guess what I mean by that is if your monolith's going into midfield, taking a shot at something, your opponent can come back swinging. And while a monolith is super tough to kill, it's far from impossible. And at the same time, your warriors, they can take a punch, especially with the -1 to hit. They won't get one shot. But if they kill 13, 14, 15 warriors and you teleport away, and then the next turn you're going to reanimate 2d3 near your reanimator, now you have like a 10-man unit. Like how does this add up to a sustainable game plan? Like this was a really cool turn you did, but then you have to follow it up again and then again and again, play 5 turns of Warhammer.
So that unit is usually dead by turn 4, maybe turn 3. If I can get 2 uses out of it of giving my opponents 5s or 0s, then it was worth the money while also move blocking them. So they're not able to execute the game plan they're wanting to.
Right.
Monolith is usually dead in 1 to 2 turns, the second monolith. But I always put it in a spot where I draw the firing lanes where they can shoot my monolith and make sure that my DDAs and my other monolith can get to it. I like to have where I don't need to pick up the DDAs, where they can just move and get to it, or even just sit in the far back because they have 72-inch range if my opponent doesn't have range, because they have heavy and dev wounds if they stay still. So I'll put them in a spot where if you come out and shoot that monolith, you're getting shot back, and I'm hitting on 2s with dev wounds. strength 18, AP 4 damage, D6 plus 1 blast. And so I usually accept that they probably can kill the one monolith. A lot of times they don't. It works, but my game plan isn't like, I'm screwed if the monolith dies when it goes in. It's more I need to have a response to kill the anti-tank units that were able to kill the monolith, whether it's eradicators or whatever, lancers, whatever they use to try and pop the monolith. I need to be able to respond.
Makes a lot of sense. It's almost like you're using that first monolith and Warriors as the first half of the game where you're just kind of dominating primary, move blocking them, controlling the pace, and getting a primary advantage. And that's the Warriors' job. And the monolith is there to like kind of bring out their attention. You're gonna have to deal with the Warriors, deal with the monolith, and it might live, it might die, whatever. You'll have a two Doomsday Arcs and a monolith ready to countershoot, and that big Warrior brick as well. So then you can kind of remove their anti-vehicles and anti-warrior guns pretty quickly at that point. That's a really cool plan. It's a really cool plan.
Yep. Then that first one has the towering. So when I go for that play, a lot of times I can just tag a building, see through. A lot of times he kills what he's going at, maybe not, just hinders it. But when they first go forward, it's more like you said, just the primary play, move block, primary play, and then to force them out, force the engagement.
Yeah, I gotcha. So with that in mind, you don't have many shots in your army outside of the warrior brick. Like that's your one instance of like, here's 40 shots. Everybody else is like monolith, not that many shots. Doomsday Arc, not that many shots. So do you ever run into like an action economy type of issue where you play certain matchups? I'm really going to cover matchups more in part 2, but like there are armies with like tons of units and transports, and it's like, you have 4, 5, 6 units you're playing the game with at the most. So it's very difficult to actually engage all of their different units and threats around the table effectively. Has that been a challenge for you?
It hasn't so far. I've played, but I haven't played too many. I played Drakari, which, as you know, it has a lot of transports. It's matchup dependent. Like Drakari depends on the transports. What's that, detachment for Lance or whatever? So my game plan is kill all their transports as fast as I can, and then the units just fall flat. They don't have the Lance anymore. Other transport armies, it's really just have to peel open the transports as quickly as I can and try and do it from a safe position, like maybe hyperphase a couple DDAs and a monolith. Measure out their threat range. How fast are you? So if I don't kill your transport, at least I'm safe. Like if you move 6, you have advance and charge. Now, if you roll a 6, that's 12 inch plus the 3 inch for the getting out of the transport. That's 15. Plus 12 for charge. If I stay outside of 27, I'm safe. So I'll usually go a couple inches closer than that. I'll probably be right at 24, so I can shoot the monolith and tell my opponent, you get a 9-inch charge. If you roll a 6, which a good player a lot of times is not going to bank on a 9-inch charge, try and set up situations like that while also move blocking. It really just depends which army it is and what transports they are. Where now that the meta's kind of shifted, where Redeemers aren't heavy everywhere now, you might see one, but they're not spamming them. This list wouldn't have been viable if we were still in triple Redeemer everywhere you go land, because that can just chew through Warriors or move fast enough to get to spots where it's hard to port away. So it's just matchup dependent.
So that makes a lot of sense. And talk to me about how you actually hold primary. Like if there's like these warriors who try to teleport away and, their job is kind of to die, and you have this monolith who maybe it's not here to die, but that's totally a reasonable thing that could happen. How do you plan on holding primary outside of like your home field objective where your own monolith and stuff is kind of chilling?
So usually I'll just try and hold that, depend on the mission. But if your home spores, I'll usually try and hold that with maybe some death marks, something else, make sure it's screened. And then one other objective, and make sure that I just keep the pace, stealing my opponent's objectives. I can usually hold down one with, another monolith or a reanimator barely touching an objective. If it's one where there's none that you can be behind a ruin safe, that means that my opponent's also not safe. So it kind of just becomes I put a reanimator on the objective and say, you can come kill it. Whatever can kill the reanimator, I'm going to kill back. It just becomes I'm going to try and give you 5s and 0s, and I'm going to try and hold a 10 for myself. Later games, try and get 15s, and then just play the mission, depending on what I draw. And, that's usually my game plan. Each game, just try and box them in as best I can, and just go for good move block plays, smart mission plays, and not expend too many resources. That's a lost condition, is if I lose too many resources in a turn.
Right. I could totally see that, because you don't have many units. So if you're losing, even like the death marks, like you said, you treat them like gold. You just have to be so on it with all of your units and what they're doing on the table.
Yes, I can't. I have to pre-measure everything and make sure I don't just accidentally make a mistake where he's getting to shoot death marks and I don't even get to shoot him back, because I just wasn't careful and didn't measure out every potential threat that they could expend.
How is it playing on the clock with this army and against this army? I mean, it's got to be a mind mess for both players, right? You have so many options at all times, and there's so much precision to your moves and deliberacy. And at the same time, your opponent's got to think of all the things you can do or come up with some sort of counterplay.
Yeah, so the clock is something that that used to be one of my weaknesses, and it's something that me and Brad have talked about and have definitely gotten better at. I've been working at it a lot, and I didn't have any problems with this army. Of course, I was playing, AdMech with 120 Skitarii, so this was a walk in the park.
Like, comparatively, I mean, this is definitely a lot simpler than 120 AdMech people.
Yes, exactly. It's really just try and think about my game plan on my opponent's turn and have as much of that as I can. Obviously, there's like secondaries that I have to draw, and that I have to account for that. The hyperphasing helps a lot, being able to reposition my units to score secondaries. And then as far as the timing goes, I just have to kind of be on it. I can't spend too much time, staring off into the abyss. I have to, pull the trigger. And a lot of times I have half of that game plan already set before my opponent even passes the turn,
Really? How do you know when to pull the trigger like that?
It really just goes by so there's usually a unit or two in their army that I'm really, afraid of. And at that point, it's just trying to get my hands on that unit and basically just set up my primary plays against them with the Fire and Fade Warriors and just wait for them to bring that unit out. And then that's usually when I pull the trigger. Or if they just go, a lot of opponents, they get psyched out by the uppy downies and by the monoliths, the warriors. And, after a turn or two of me doing the tricks and, all the plays, they'll just kind of have a go turn where they'll just push hard. And that's another time I'll go. So.
Right. So there's so much depth to this army, and there's so much option in the Necron Codex. You could have taken Imhotep for an extra command point. You could have taken heavy destroyers instead of Doomsday Arcs, or heavy destroyers and Doomsday Arcs. Double Monolith is a choice in and of itself. How did you land on this particular configuration? This looks like it's the product of like who knows how many test games, but it's also a really uniquely innovative list. And I'm just wondering, like, was the goal here to snowflake in the first place, and you just kind of found a way to make it work, or was this like a process of evolution and a diversion from the kind of more standard Necron builds as a means to solve problems?
Yeah, so it started with a list that our buddy had was messing with on TTS, and we had, we play on teams on TTS and just mess around on there. But he had another variant with the Silent King, and it had the heavy destroyers, it had other stuff, but it had the double monolith, and I really liked it, so I took it to Lone Star Open and didn't do as well as I'd like at that one. So I made some changes, which was I put in the Warriors, took out the King, and kind of made it my own, and took it to Texas Open, and here we are.
That's awesome. I always find that when players don't just copy their copy list and just run with it, and instead they make it their own, they always do get better results. That's just something I've noticed after years of doing this.
Yep.
What? Sorry.
No, you're fine.
This is really just my last question here. If you had one piece of advice to give to any aspiring Warhammer player, what would it be, Justin?
One piece of advice, I would say, master the movement phase.
Really? Okay.
The movement phase, use the tape measure, anything with movement, it wins games. Just, measure out everything.
You sound like an Art of War poster.
Yeah. Right.
That's amazing. I love it. Well, Justin, thank you so much for coming on the show. Your list ideas are innovative. Your dedication to getting better is phenomenal. And it's just really exciting to see someone climb the competitive 40K ladder so successfully. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Listeners, I hope you really enjoyed this episode. I know I did, talking to Justin, learning about this really unique and exciting army. And just, it shows about the innovation and availability in the game to express yourself. Justin, seriously, congratulations on the job well done.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You're very welcome. All right, folks, we are going to continue this conversation in part 2, where Justin's going to walk through his games. You can catch that on our Patreon. You can support the show for $5 a month. It's patreon.com/AOW40K. You get access to our Discord server along with 250 plus other part 2s. It's just endless content. We talk about Warhammer. You like when we talk about Warhammer. So go subscribe. Also, it lets us keep the lights on and keep producing the show for you, and we love that. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We'll catch you later.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. The Art of War 40K.com.